Film Club.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Film Club. I'm one of your hosts, Andy Harrison, and with me, as always, it's Andy Donaldson.
Hello.
Every week in Film Club, we invite you along to watch a film with us, and this week, we're taking a look at Short Term 12.
Which is a story of a group of young adults that are looking after a bunch of teenagers inside an establishment that's meant to help them. And it goes through the backstories of each individual character, gives you an idea of a very natural but unnatural way of life. You haven't seen this before, have you, Andy?
No, I hadn't. Directed by a guy called Destin Cretton. As far as I'm aware, he had done a film before this, and then he's done like one or two after.
So I watched Just Mercy recently, and also he does another film called The Glass Castle, and it's based off a really good book. I've not seen the film, but the book's amazing. And all of them, he has a really good, like, the raw collaborations with Brie Larson.
I've recently came across Destin Cretton because he's announced to be directing a Marvel film.
Yeah, Shang-Chi and the Legends of Ten Rings.
Shang-Chi and Legends of Ten Rings. And this is a sort of a common trend at the moment to take directors who have had low-budget, quite creatively interesting hits and then hand them the keys to a much bigger franchise with a much, much bigger budget. Obviously, we saw it with Taika Waititi. We saw it with Gareth Edwards. We saw it with Colin Trevorrow, Ryan Johnson. I'm kind of interested to see what this guy does because Short Term 12 was really, really, really charming. Like it's so full of personality. You have this really distinct setup, this idea of these kids that are in care and they're being looked after by young adults who are essentially still trying to find themselves a little bit as well. It puts them so wonderfully like almost in parallel with one another where they become each other's support system.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But every character in this film is so wonderfully well defined and well realized, and it has these moments of heart and it has these moments of like sort of relaxing tonal musical montage, and eventually it all comes together to create a film that isn't necessarily this like standout, incredible, gonna blow your mind sort of film, but one that just has such a voice and such a personality about it.
So it's interesting, it was actually based on his experiences growing up. And he worked in one of these kind of establishments, he worked in one of these places. And he wrote a screenplay and based Brie Larson's character on himself. It was only later that he changed it to a girl. He actually interviewed some people in this scenario. It's in such a way that despite these testing scenarios that the characters are put in, it's also warm.
Warm is a great word for it because these characters are they're living quite ordinarily sort of cold lives. They're living in very trying situations, and they are characters who aren't really the sort of characters that Hollywood would normally like to put on screen. For the last couple years, I guess the last couple of decades at this point, there has rightfully been lobbied criticism at Hollywood for not being diverse in the sorts of backgrounds that they portray on screen, and almost like supporting the white picket fence nuclear family. Here what we have is a much more modern, a much more unpleasant, but also much more real interpretation of what some families are like today. But that doesn't mean their lives are horrible 24/7. And the best thing about Short Term 12 is that there is a little bit of a golden warmth at the center of it.
So another thing that's interesting about this film is, much like when we were going on about Whiplash, obviously a great film, that was created from a short. It was created from a short film that was made into a bigger one. Similar premise again. So when he wrote the screenplay, it came out as a short, and it featured Lakeith Stanfield, who appeared in the film that we did review recently, which is Sorry to Bother You. Lakeith Stanfield played Marcus. Now, I was trying to think in my head, which scene is it? He appeared in the short, sorry. Which scene is it? And I think it's the scene where they're rapping.
Yeah.
Which is, oh my God, it's tough. It's a tough scene. It's very good. It's very hard. And it's full of subtleties, it's full of details in this film. Now, Lakeith Stanfield is absolutely sublime in this film. He's sublime.
So good. He's absolutely incredible. Yeah. And the best thing is...
the parallel of that performance.
Well, he's so different to what he was in Sorry to Bother You. And yet he still knocks it out of the park here. But he doesn't only just get the rapping scene, which is absolutely incredible and is probably the best scene in the film, where he sort of like he raps to express his feelings, and he doesn't even pretend that he's not doing it. Afterwards, it's quite overt, and he knows it is. But then he also gets like another like second, almost equally as heartbreaking, if not more, scene where he gets his head shaved later on.
Oh mate,
and you find out why he wants his head shaved. And it's it's to check for scars or lumps or damage as to what was happening when he was living at home. And he doesn't have a lot of time in this film. He has sort of like a couple of moments, but in those two, he manages to like just so succinctly break your heart.
And it's interesting because it has got quite, we've got like Rami Malek appears in this as well. He went on to do, was it called Robot?
Mr.
What's
Robot.
it called, Andy? Yeah, he went on to do Mr. Robot. And he appears quite a small kind of performance in this film. He's like the newbie, the sort of like the guy to be the go-between between like kind of us as an audience learn what this operation is. So whilst he is a biggish name, I don't know if he was at the time, it's interesting to see him play a quite small performance. And you've got John Gallagher Jr. plays Mason, who is the boyfriend of Grace, the fiance, should I say. Mm-hmm. He has a really cool scene. Again, I feel this film's full of subtleties and detail. One of my favourite moments, just drawing back to the rap scene, is when Mason's with him playing the drums. And towards the end, as Marcus is coming to the end of his rap, he stops playing the drums and just like kind of just brings that emotion together. But it's that subtle of the drums stopping to let the expression come through even further. Brilliant. Caitlin Denver, who's Jaden, she was fantastic, and she comes across this kind of rebellious teenager with her issues, but then she warms up to Grace, Brie Larson's character, and they develop this kind of like sisterhood. And then of course Brie Larson, who became like this is her first lead performance, and she again kills it like they all do. They absolutely kill their roles, and despite her being in a position of authority, she's trying to help others, but as you said there, they're all leaning on each other. And what better example when Jaden's had that kind of outburst and she's like falling asleep in the back of Mason's car on Grace. It's intimate. It's exceptionally intimate. Peaks and troughs. You have some moments where everything's coming together, like that scene where she tells Mason that she's pregnant, and then he kind of goes, "Oh shit," and he goes, "Oh, get in like that." For me, I can relate to it in the sense that there's been scenarios where you're at your absolute worst. You do feel terrible. You feel like, what's his name? Sammy, the guy that wears a vest and he runs away at the end, which is another thing I'd like to point out. You're in bed and you're having those horrible moments, but other times you're absolutely top of your game. You're the happiest person in the world. And that kind of relatability of those kind of ups and downs of emotions. Going back to Sammy, interestingly, some of the characters involved, it was their first time acting. It was like kind of open calls, and he was one of them. What I liked about his character is obviously he's very quiet, he runs away, and then there's that moment where Nate's character, Rami Malek, comes over, finds that little, doll inside the thing, gives it to him, and the next moment you see him putting the American flag on, to run outside. I feel is when he's running outside, instead he's looking around as if it's some sort of game. If you compare that to the first scene where he runs away, he's running away and his eyes are on the gate, his eyes are on the end goal, but there, it comes across more of a game to him.
Short Term 12 has really impressed me. It's also got that sort of cinematography style that I'm an absolute sucker for. It's a little bit documentary. It's rough around the edges, but it's also tight. Like I love it. I think Short Term 12 has really, really impressed me, and I can't wait to see what Destin Daniel Cretton does next.
So I agree. I'm looking forward to
There is Short Term 12. You can let us know in the comments below what you thought of Short Term 12, or you can hit us up on Twitter, as always. But Andy and I are going to be back once again next week, where we're going to take a look at Moneyball.
This was a shortlister in my top 10 films the last decade, so I hope you enjoy.
Cannot wait. Till then, get watching.